Researcher, and I'm really pleased to have been invited by Scanning Pens today to talk about my research, particularly with some amazing news that's recently come out with the Ministry of Justice approving the use of reading pens in prisons, which is kind of one of the basis of why I did my research. So Julia's joined me. This is Julia Clouter. Did you just want to introduce yourself, Julia?
Sure. Hi everybody. So I'm Julia and I am Head of Education at Scanning Pens, which means that I am the person behind resources and training and support provided by Scanning Pens. And I'm also really lucky to have been on some of this journey with Chrissy and involved with her research, and particularly in looking through that research and then developing it into documents that are available via the Scanning Pens website, which I'll talk a little bit later. So my role is really around training and support, but without Chrissy that doesn't work, because it's her research that has been absolutely crucial in enabling us to present the right information, the right andragogy, the right learning support approach for adult learners, for prisoners. So Chrissy, without further ado, I think what I would do is say welcome. The floor is yours. I will, if you like, put your presentation centre stage and I shall just disappear off until you're ready for me. How does that sound?
Fabulous, thank you.
Okay, I will just say, everybody, we're expecting this webinar to last about an hour, and there will be a good amount of time in the panel. We've got a fabulous panel at the end of Chrissy's session with Governor Sean Mycroft and Janet Christmas, who's Senko, Regional Senko, both absolutely jam-packed full of information and knowledge that they're really happy to share with everybody today about how education is working in the prisons that they are working in. So I feel we've got a really splendid event for you this afternoon, and I hope you enjoy it. Please get involved, please do share, chat, and we'll make sure that all of those conversations get developed during the panel session. So I'm going to say thank you, Chrissy, and over to you.
Thank you. So I started prison studies quite a while ago based on a little conversation that I had with the director of Scanning Pens Limited, one of them, Jack Churchill, and I think he might have had a small drink in his hand when he said he imagined the use of his pens being in cells where prisoners could have access to them and just be independent with their learning. And a little sort of icon of a bulb popped into my head, and I thought that is an absolutely amazing idea. Let's go and do it. But it wasn't as simple as that. I would have liked to have been as simple as that, but it wasn't. Many months later, after I went through a lot of processes, such as applying to Her Majesty's Prison and Probation Services National Research Committee, got the okay for the concept and the ideas of my research, then I had to basically find a prison that was going to let me in. So I had to approach the governors and the management and the security teams, and then go to the prison educators, who are obviously contracted to come into the prison to provide education, and then get the okay from the tutors and the prisoners. So it was quite a big process, and I'm really pleased to say that for an absolute amazing guy called Mr. Joffe, I was able to get into Challengewood, and he paved the way for me to be able to do my first study. So I didn't commit a crime. It's not a way to get a contract and get into prison. Try and do it the way I've done it. What did they want? What did they want from my research? So it kind of came slightly obvious that there was different needs from different aspects of who I was talking to. So the security guys obviously wanted to have an assistive technology device within the prison that was going to be secure and safe and not cause them mountains of headaches, absolute mountains of headaches. And for the educators, it was about maybe raising that level of support and raising that level of self-belief and importance for the actual prisoners. Oh, my slides have disappeared, Julia. I don't know if you can put them back. I don't know if that's tech. Thank you. For the governors, obviously, they've got lots of fruit in their basket. They're juggling lots and lots of needs. So they really wanted to ensure that they were getting rehabilitation ideas and concepts developed and thought about. They wanted to support the rights of the prisoners, and it was about the opportunities, positive experiences for their prisoners and also the staff. We then found out about peer mentors when I first did my first study at HMP Challengewood. It's not because I met any peer mentors at that prison, but one of the outcomes of that very first study was the identity that peer mentors actually may be an incredibly supportive tool when introducing information and new ideas into the education and environment, because they're on common ground. They've got sort of understandable language skills, and they kind of get each other. And then for the prisoners, it was really about the results. So I really found out a great deal about what the prisoners were looking for. So they were ones that were unable to read. So just being able to read was massively important. Writing a letter was huge. Reading probation papers, I was often sort of told that was something that was massively important to them. Reading things in prison, like the signs and the directions and the canteen sheet, things that we might have took for granted. Getting a qualification, that was absolutely so important. And being able to see how they could use these new skills outside, having a transferable skill for when they left. Then we also had the ESOL, the English as Second Language prisoners. So being able to communicate and not feel so isolated within the prison environment was hugely important, particularly for those prisoners who were very unique in their language needs. For instance, I met a Turkish prisoner, and he was the only Turkish-speaking prisoner in that environment. So being able to communicate with his fellow inmates was massively important, because it would alleviate his mental health difficulties of being alone, incredibly alone and very isolated. One guy said realizing he wasn't stupid was just such a cathartic moment, a really huge moment for him, because he'd assumed that his inability to read was because he was stupid. In actual fact, he clearly had a reading difficulty of dyslexia. And then others were talking about overcoming blocks that were put in their way. So experiences they had at school, particularly for the older prisoners. So being smacked around the head, being sort of directed to do sports only because that's where they shone. And then finally, it was about pride. It was about having achieved something. It was about having actually reached a little goal that they set themselves, that they were able to achieve, and that they weren't failing, that they weren't falling at that first block. So HMP Challengewood was my first prison, and the identified outcome for that one was about functional skills English. So it was just really trying to see if we could improve the outcomes and the grades for those that were undertaking functional skills English, which on paper sounded like a brilliant idea, but what I hadn't anticipated was actually what it opened up. It opened up immense doorways of understanding that it wasn't just possibly going to be useful for those that were undertaking specific examinations, such as the functional skills. It was potentially going to be hugely useful for foreign national prisoners, because the dictionary on the pen we were able to use in that prison was able to sort of give alternative versions of a word they were looking at. I wasn't able to help them with pronunciation, and it really, really was a thought process of studying them came directly from HMP Challengewood. And that's where the idea about the peer mentors as well, because the teachers were absolutely fabulous at Challengewood, but what they identified was actually within their class, they would often have a peer mentor, a bit like a teaching assistant that we recognise in primary and secondary school, who were positively placed to actually support the learners, but were using the same language and the same kind of dialogue that really engaged the prisoners, really engaged that sort of reciprocal conversations that they had within the classroom environment. Then I was very fortunate to meet an exams officer at a Access Arrangements conference, and mention to her the study I'd done in Challengewood. And she went back and asked in her prison if we could do a study there. And once again, we got the okay from the governor, and we got the okay from the educators there, which were People Plus. But I had to obviously go back to HMPPS to request to do a study here. Very fortunately, was given the okay. So the focus and the concept on this study was around the workshop training courses. And the idea behind that was a lot of the guys were going into this course specifically believing there was going to be a limitation on how much they would need to read, or how much examinations, paper examinations they would need to do. And of course, what they got was quite a shock, because there is quite a high level of reading, and the workbook, particularly in the painting and decorating course, was absolutely immense that they had to work through. They also had to pass the one-day training course on health and safety to enable them to get on these courses. And at that prison, I was really fortunate to hear about the Storybook Dads concept, which is very bizarre because it's actually recorded or developed at Challengewood. And I'd not heard one word about this amazing concept of Storybook Dads until I rocked up at prison 2. And I was also really fortunate to find out that they ran their own peer mentor training course at prison 2. So there is the Shannon Trust peer mentor course, but this prison were developing their own. So it opened up an absolute myriad of opportunities to work with so many different tutors, with so many different people, with so many different outcomes and needs with the reading pen. So it was to increase the ability to actually access the written and reading aspects of the course and to overcome those reading difficulties, because that was slowing the courses down. And the electrician tutor told me that he would often have to stop the content of his course just to focus on supporting reading and writing. So to alleviate that difficulty of enabling the prisoners to get on with the reading themselves was amazing. One thing that did come out of that area was also the noise. So we invested in some noise cancelling headphones, because the reading pen, as you may know, does have headphones, but they're the little ones you pop into your ears. So to be able to have the capacity to wear the noise cancelling headphones when they were reading the manuals in their electricity workshop was absolutely immense. It also worked really well for a couple of the guys who were on the spectrum, because it enabled them to just completely shut everything out and focus. So that was another element that cropped up, and I was able to take that back into some primary and secondary education with children who were on the autistic spectrum, about actually creating opportunities within a busy environment to block out that noise and that distraction. And the peer mentors were absolutely amazing at that prison. They were so engaged and so enthusiastic. To be able to actually have access to a piece of assistive technology is immense and huge. And so to have something that was small and portable, and in the words of one of the peer mentors, they're absolutely fantastic. Well, he may have added a couple of other choice words before that, but I'll let your imagination run wild so you can work out what he said. But what it also gave was another training aspect to their course, to their peer mentor training course. And that really, again, encourages that sort of thought process of achieving things. And one of the peer mentors I met had actually said it had incited him to recognise that he was quite good at sharing and disseminating information. And he was seriously contemplating on leaving prison, going to look into a teacher training course for adult learners, because he felt he really got something from it. But he also recognised that if he had the tools to support him when delivering that information sharing, it absolutely created an amazing feeling for him. He really felt quite euphoric about actually doing something and achieving something. So these studies were starting to look at not just an educational aspect and outcome, they were starting to recognise a human element to them. Prison 3 was really fortunate. In Prison 2 introduced me to some of the staff at Prison 3, and I was able to work with those illiterate prisoners at this prison. They were completely unable to read, write or spell. They were predominantly older prisoners who had taken physically active jobs. So we had a guy that worked on the cranes to build some of the huge buildings in London, including the Shard. We had a guy who was a runner in a TV studio, so his job was very much a physical one. But they'd kept not being able to read to themselves. And what I also recognised, particularly with one of them, who'd been a farmer, was the frustration of not being able to learn to read was really, really, really just overwhelming for him, absolutely overwhelming. The younger prisoners in that environment, however, were much more much more open about not being able to read, in that they were able to use assistive technology on the outside, such as their mobile phones, or they would ask their girlfriend or their wives to read things for them. So a transcript of the 5 prisoners I met in that prison is available on the Scanning Pens website. And I think Julia's got the web link for you later. So if you're kind of interested to hear those stories of what it's like to be a complete illiterate prisoner, and then have an opportunity to be given a piece of technology, an accepted piece of technology within that environment, they all had different stories and they all had different approaches, but the outcomes were positive. One of them not only did incredibly well with his functional skills, but he was looking at doing the GCSE in English, which I just thought was utterly amazing from starting at that pre-functional level. He was the ESOL learner, but he was also severely dyslexic. Then I went to prison 4, which is unfortunately a prison study that hasn't quite finished, because something called COVID absolutely came along and ruined it for me. I just don't believe that happened, but it did. In that prison, we were really focusing on foreign nationals, maths functional skills, because we had the English information from prison 1. And it was an opportunity to meet the Shannon Trust peer mentors as well, which was a different, they'd already been trained. So it was how we could introduce the pens alongside the fantastic program that the Shannon Trust deliver. So the prisoner, and one prisoner in that prison was also given permission to purchase his own pen, which was like a hallelujah moment. The governor at that prison, who I'm so pleased has joined us on the panel today, he identified not only how empowering it was going to be for that particular prisoner, but he also wanted to talk about the use of the reading pen for prison officers, which was an absolute fantastic opportunity, because I was also doing studies with the prison officer training courses, the POLT training courses in Lilleshall, at the same time as I was doing the research in prison 4. But as I say, COVID sadly came along and interrupted that one. So what were the blocks to my studies? I encountered, obviously, security as one of the biggest blocks, and it was really important to have those discussions with everybody that was involved in bringing me in, the gatekeepers that were bringing me into the studies, to understand what the pen can and can't do and what risk it was potentially going to raise. So as a result of that, I'm really, really fortunate and grateful for a fantastic security manager called Emma, who helped me develop a compliance document so that we could enable uniformity in the approaches and the understanding of what was important to the security measures, so that there was comfort if a prison should purchase the pen. We had developed already, I developed a document which I gave to Scanning Pens to enable them to really support what they were asking, what the prisons were asking about the security element. However, a really interesting element of that came from Gary Reid, who was the lead project manager for learning development and also the lead for diversity and inclusion in the prison officer training environment. And he put forward that if we remove the concerns of the pen, it may be a way of alleviating the difficulty of prison officers having access to the pen in their working environment. The reason why Gary was thinking it from that point of view was because obviously the study I was doing with him was within the prison training environment outside the prisons. And he was concerned that if we were going to be including diversity and inclusion in our study, by giving prison officers the pen during their training and supporting them through their examinations and their learning, not having use of the pen in their working environment might not quite tick the box of diversity and inclusion. So what did he mean? What did Gary mean? And he said that he respected and understood why there needed to be security measures, absolutely obviously, but by putting the pen, which was one of the compliances that we identified, onto the shadow board, and I'm hoping everybody that's listening today understands what the shadow board is, but briefly, it is a board in a secure environment with the outline of the piece of equipment that's going to be taken out to be used for that hour that day, then put straight back on. So it's a visual quick check. Yet the wrench is up there. Yet the camera's up there. Yes, the reading pen is back where it should be. But by putting it on that board, it becomes a commodity. It becomes an identifiable, oh, is this a risk? Is this something that could maybe be useful for me, that I could, I don't know, sell, change into a tattoo gun, whatever. So by alleviating some of those risks and that accessibility, I think what Gary was trying to say was, if we could think of a way around alleviating that, maybe the pen then does not become a commodity. Maybe it just becomes something that's of everyday use. So creating that common ground was massively important in the prison officers study. And so removing that risk, removing that strategy, and enabling the prison officers in their training courses who were using the pen to immense effect. One chap I met had never passed an examination in his life, and he got 80% as his final pass mark in his prison officer training course. And he was understandably very, very pleased, very excited, but also did kind of mention, am I going to be able to have this pen when I go out into my work environment? So the prison officer studies was used with all new recruits who identified, self-identified, or who had been witnessed or viewed in the classroom environment as maybe needing some support. We were going to use the ReaderPens for those that were returning for compulsory training courses at learning centres, and also for the long-term PTI course at Lilla Shaw, which I think was about 16 weeks long. So that was a really, really positive group of people that we could have quite a long-term study on, and really gain some insight about whether the pen did support adult learners in that environment. Then, of course, the prison officers being able to have access to the pen in their working life became something questionable. And I met a great guy called Pat, who was a tutor, who was severely dyslexic, who was actually having access to the reading pen in his training officers within the prison. But again, he'd had to get through security, etc., to be allowed to have it in his secure office. So he wasn't quite carrying it around, which is a little vision that I potentially may have in the back of my head. And so obviously we'll talk to Sean Mycroft later about the fact that he had also separately identified why prison officers should have access to ReaderPens and why it may be potentially of use to them. So what assumptions did I come across when I was bringing the concept of using pens as a study into an adult learning environment? The biggest one, I think, was that it would impact on how reading was being taught. It might remove the need, and therefore the actual physical person to be there to teach the chaps how to read or to undertake their courses, etc., etc. Or it would stop them reading. But the results were actually the complete opposite. And the bottom line is, it's a great tool, but we do still need the tutors. We really need their support and their encouragement and their skills to be part of it. It's a tool that works very, very well with fantastic tutors alongside it. It won't work on its own. So sharing the use of the pen becomes really, really, really important, how that's disseminated and how that's actually given to them. So I met, in prison 3, I met prisoner M1, and he'd been in prison for 9 years, and he basically reached a point where he just was not, he said to me, I loathe reading. I absolutely loathe it. And he tried his best, he'd had a real good go, and he was really fortunate that the teaching assistant, who was a lovely lady that came in, was really, really supportive of him, but recognised he was basically at that point where he was just going to give up. So what I did was I took along a reading pen, and I suggested he just picked up a book that he was interested in, and it was actually an encyclopedia about dogs, and it was huge. And he basically read that book with the pen, every single word with the pen, and it must have been a mountain of an event to be able to do that. He would trot along to her office virtually every day, sit quietly, headphones in, using that pen to read his encyclopedia. About 4 weeks later, he was starting to go back and dip into the book. He started going back to the beginning. He started to reread it, and he was doing this independently and using the pen on words that he had difficulty pronouncing, or he just wanted to hear how to do it more, because he was really keen all of a sudden to start being able to spell as well. And it was just such an amazing story when I returned, and he told me very proudly he'd written his first letter ever, not just in prison, his first letter ever. It had took him 3 days, but he'd done it, and he was understandably massively proud. And I just think that story for me was a huge turning point to understand the emotive aspect of the studies. And as I say, the transcript is going to be on the Scanning Pens website. You can access that transcript from that study. So if you are interested to hear what the 5 men said, please go and have a look at that. A lot of queries we got was about the fact it couldn't be used in examinations. So I'm really pleased that Janet Christmas, who's a SENCO for a number of prisons in the north of England, is going to join us on the panel later, because she's got some exciting news, reference examinations as well. So keep with us. JCQ recently did an update which indicated the importance of SENCOs making decisions about considering when to use readers and scribes. And I know within the prison environment, that's a real difficulty of getting somebody to come along to be a reader or a scribe in the examinations. And the reason why JCQ are basically saying ditch the human is because they realise that that human's not going to be able to follow you around for the rest of your life. That human is not going to be able to come shopping with you or go into your workplace or wherever else you might need somebody to help you with reading. But the use of technology is something that's really become absolutely apparent, particularly during COVID, of being able to get the most out of technology, getting the most out of assistive technology to enable us to continue to communicate and to continue to learn and to continue to work. So the Ministry of Justice, having approved the use of reading pens in prisons, is really, really a huge hallelujah, because of the difficulty of what you can access in prisons assisted technology-wise. So it's an absolutely amazing piece of news and so exciting. And yes, it doesn't cover every other bit of assistive technology that a person will use outside of prisons, but it is a huge starting point, and I think it's something to be massively celebrated about. And I do hope that some of my research was instrumental in some of those decision making. I went to a fantastic conference before lockdown, where I met where I met the lady from OFSTED talking about the OFSTED expectations for education in prison. And what she indicated was actually how important life skills for prisoners was going to be on leaving prison. And I think her words about understanding transferable skills, about it not just being about an educational piece of paper, but actually about something that's going to be utilised and useful outside. And what JCQ are saying about upping the use of assistive technology is a hugely important skill that will be usable within the workplace. So I just think we've got something here, and something that we can all jump on the bandwagon. And I think we should be really pushing the use of assistive technology in prisons. So assumptions of tutors and prisoners. So one of the questions that came across was, are tutors the best place for people to introduce the pens? And what I saw when I was encountering the most engaged, enthusiastic, totally on it, totally believing the pen, was modelling of the most positivity out of this world. It was absolutely unbelievable. But it meant that those tutors that had that passion, had that understanding, had been able to have time to understand what it could do. They were sort of interested in the resources Julia was promoting and sort of putting together, which are now fully available on the Scanning Pens website. And then we had some no, and a no came from a workshop tutor who identified in his environment that the peer mentors were modelling the use of the pen better because of that language and that in-group relationship. So although he was a positive promoter of it, what he had identified that was peer mentors just seemed to get it a little bit better, just seemed to get that encouragement and that, look mate, take this, that language in a far more familiarised way, which then brought in the illiterate, pre-functional, functional skill prisoner learner into that environment. And then having an in-depth discussion with the peer mentor whose hopes are to become a teacher in the future, we attentively started a conversation about the assumption of his capacity to support and read for another prisoner was 100% brilliant idea. And I asked him to take a little step back and actually think about, what if it's not something that's educational? What if it's something private? And the reason why I went down that line of thinking was a prisoner had shared with me how difficult it was to ask a peer mentor to read something private, to read something maybe from their legal team. And it would take him 3 days to work out which peer mentor he trusted, which one he was going to approach to ask to read that. And quite rightly, he said, if I had the reading pen, I wouldn't have needed to ask that. I could have kept that private stuff private. And that's exactly what he went ahead and did. He got some legal documentation, asked his tutor if he could bring it into class. Tutor said yes, brought it along and used the reading pen to read his private information. That's massively important, to allow a person to have that privilege to read their own correspondence. Solutions. So what did we do? What did we learn from our prison studies? So Julie's got the resources. I'm going to ask her to come back in and talk about those fantastic resources. And maybe while she's doing that, you might want to put on the chat any questions about my studies or anything you might like to ask me.
Thank you, Chrissy. Yes, so informative, and I enjoy hearing so much about your studies because it opens up a window and helps us to gain an understanding that we might not necessarily have, just how impactful it is to be able to read your personal correspondence. So impactful to know how important that is, and to be able to facilitate something like that. I think you have made a huge impact through your studies that will go on and hopefully outwards and outwards like a ripple in a pond, you know. So I've worked with Chrissy for a few years now, and part of what we've done together is working through the findings that Chrissy has come up with through her research, and then try to translate that into some practical resources that can be used by you. So my role, head of education at Scanning Pens, I was a teacher, a Senko. I worked in primary and secondary. I spent a lot of my time as a teacher working in PRUs, working with students who were excluded, did some advisory work trying to reintroduce excluded pupils back into various schools with support and information for teachers about how to support their particular learning needs. So many of them were illiterate. So many of them had literacy difficulties. It's a really significant thread that runs through. So my interest has been a continuum as I've progressed. So really exciting to be able to take Chrissy's information and then to be able to translate that into some resources. So I'm going to do a bit of signposting for you now. If you go onto the website at Scanning Pens, which is www.scanningpens.co.uk. We do have .com and around the world. I just went on and checked to see if all of this information was into all of the other web pages, and I can't guarantee it is, but if you go onto the co.uk, you will find all of these resources and you can freely download them all. So if you click markets and then go down to prisons, you will then find 3 options. The one is case studies, academic research, and support for your trial. So those are the 3 places that you can go to get high quality information. So the first click is case studies, and Chrissy has written in great depth these studies. One is the ESOL prisoners, the prison studies that she was talking about for mathematics, opportunities to support reading in the workshops, the peer mentor studies, and most recent study, which was the pen on the wing. This is where the chap has actually been able to take the pen and have that to use it in his cell, which has made such a significant difference. Been a long journey, but we've got there. So all of these documents here can be found on the case studies page, and I have condensed them into short readable studies. If you want to read all of the detail, go to the academic research, Chrissy, go to the academic research page and you can absolutely get into the fine detail, and I would encourage you to do that. If you are looking for some bite-sized information to take away or digest quickly, I would suggest you go to the case studies page. So that is a helpful signpost for you. Another helpful signpost is to let you know that there are video resources. So Chrissy was talking earlier about some of the prisoners who were actually developing some videos that they'd made in the workshop, and one of those is available on the webpage. It's called Ali and the Magic Pen, and he talks about just how it's changed his ability to read and decode. So that's a lovely video. There are also some tips on how to use the pen. I'm holding up ReaderPen Secure pen here, which is the one pictured. You'll see Motorsport magazine behind it. If you don't know how the pen functions and you wanted to just do a quick look to see what it actually does and how it works, I would navigate to that tip for using your pen, or starting with ReaderPen Secure. We develop these videos specifically for you, so we would be happy for you to navigate there and also to share these resources. I had a conversation with Janet Christmas a little while ago about prisoner TV, and one of the things that would be possible is to show these videos. So if prisoners did have the pens in their cells, or if they required some training, it would be possible to run some of these videos so that they could have that support and training. I've included this video here. You'll see it's a fire engine. There's a lovely chap here called Saf, very dyslexic chap, and it just occurred to me how wonderful it would be to be able to show a case study in prisons to say, hey, this is the experience of someone with very severe dyslexia and low self-esteem for their ability to undertake learning, to be able to get on, get promotion, crack on and progress in their career. And this is resonant for the POLTS as well, the prisoner officer training. But this is such a great case study when someone who's empowered by being able to use the assistive technology tool that they need to then get on and be successful in the world of work. So I think there's a lot of resource that's available on the website that you might be interested in sharing. And the next little bit of information that I've been putting together is a low text help sheet for prisoners. It'll come hot off the press very soon. I'm still making a couple of minor tweaks to things that I want to be a little bit better, but the idea is that you can just download this file, print it off, and then give it to the prisoner in his cell with the worksheet, and then they can crack on with very little human support because they can follow the pictures to help them to use the pen. There is a really great wizard on the new ReaderPen Secure. So if you can find your way to the wizard, it will set the pen up for you. Go to right-handed or turn the talking menu off if you are illiterate, so that the pen will just read through all the menu options. But I think all of this stuff here, I just want you to know we have so much information that will be helpful to you. It's all freely available. The last bit that I'll just briefly talk about is, here's a great word, extrapolated from Chrissy's research. Fabulous stuff, which was my job. And I've condensed things into short implementation and user guides so that you can look at the 10 top tips, and these are created with Chrissy as well, so I've had the benefit of her expertise, making sure that we're absolutely on point for what will be successful in the prison environment. The support for officers document came out of Chrissy's HMPPS POLTS intervention research, and a lot of that information is about andragogy. It's about how do you support adult learners who don't necessarily want to be identified as someone with a learning difference, and that's the biggie. And so a lot of the really good information within that training document is how do you approach, and it's things like not saying take out a reader pen to help you with your reading. It's things like saying that might be a job for your blue pen there, why not use that today? So there are lots of great supporting tips that you can find in there. Neil, who is in the chat box, can answer any questions for you around purchase of pens, or if you want more information from the sort of business angle of things. If you want to get in touch with me, for training for your prison or a group of people from your prison, I will happily provide training support. That can come through me or it can go through Neil. So I'm Julia@scanningpens.com. Chrissy mentioned earlier fire safety, security and compliance document that is also downloadable from the support from your trial part of the website. We're nearly there. In fact, we're getting to the exciting bit now, which is the panel session. And so it will be time for me to invite Janet Christmas and Sean Mycroft, because we're going to start to answer your questions and start to develop a conversation around the use of scanning pens in prisons. And it's been such an extraordinary year, really. So there's a lot to talk about. And then I will just I'm going to turn myself off in a sec, and then I will bring myself back in at the end. There is a very short survey that you can fill out if you would like to give us some feedback, because everything that you contribute helps us to support you better. So that will be the last thing from me in about 20 minutes. Chrissy, I'm going to go over to you and I'm going to put you all centre stage. How does that sound?
Oh, beautiful. So I just want to apologise for the strange guy in grey who appeared with a cup of tea. It's not one of the prisoners, it's my husband. So Janet and Sean, really thank you for joining us. Sean, would you like to introduce yourself, please? Is he frozen?
Yeah, I'm Sean Mycroft. I'm the governor at Moreland. I've also got with me Nat Garfield, who's head of ReaderPens, and I've got Kim Yousaf, who's my learning skills manager.
It's really nice for you all to join us. And Janet.
Hello there.
I'm not going to tell you who you are.
Okay, I'm Janet Christmas. I'm one of the Senko team for NOVUS, and I work predominantly across the Yorkshire prisons, so Mullen's one of my prisons.
So I just want to say thank you, first of all, for Janet for being my guide every time I've gone up to the frozen north. I am originally a northerner, but now I'm a soft southerner because I live in Devon. So it's always been such a huge shock to my system when I've gone up to there and frozen to death in the prison. And then I'd also like to say it was great for me to be introduced to Sean when I came up to do the studies, and to hear his thoughts and his concepts about it not only just being useful for prisoners, but for the prison officers as well. So, Sean, I'd like to come to you first and ask why you felt that this piece of assistive technology was going to be something that was going to be workable in your prison.
Well, we're an extremely complex establishment. We've got a range of different cohorts. We've got men convicted of sexual offences nationally and a variety of ages from 21 upwards. We've got a cohort of 240 foreign national men. We've got a cohort of up to 60 young offenders, and we've got a cohort of South Yorkshire men for resettlement, age 18 up to as old as we live, really. So we've got a really complex and diverse population where communication is absolutely critical to everything that we do. So and it's also really important that the men are able to communicate back, and that there's a form of effective communication. So we've got lots of platforms that we use, from face-to-face consultation groups, Connect TV, notices, PID workers, etc., etc. But as you alluded to earlier, that it's not everybody's preferred choice. Some people feel embarrassed by their education levels, and they're not willing to engage, and they're not willing to sit in classrooms. We've found out through COVID that some of our men have learned better within their own cells. The scanning pens have been crucial to learning, really. It allows us to break down some of those barriers, allows men to get confident in what they're able to do and say, and understand what we're trying to achieve, particularly through the pandemic, where we have an average churn of about 180 men per month, and we've currently sat with 18 men pre-entry level, not including ESOL, and we've got 60 men that are entry level 2 or below. So that tells you how important really the scanning pens are to us, and to be able to allow some kind of development through education and improve their literacy and numeracy levels. So without that, we'd be stuck. We also use them in the activity areas. We've got 4 in the Braille workshop, where the foreign national men predominantly use them, and then they produce Braille. And again, it all ties into our rehabilitative culture and continued path of learning. So it's really important, really. We've not got enough of them. I do believe that through a LDD assessment or a foreign national assessment, that all men that require one should be issued one for the duration of the custodial period, so they reach a stage where they're at an acceptable level of learning and they've got confidence in their ability. Obviously, the barrier to that is the cost, if I'm being honest. There's always a story. Yeah, there's always a nervousness about new technology, particularly if it's got a USB or kind of data capturing facility. But as we know, again, through COVID, that we've smashed some barriers down. We've got iPads in prisons, we've got mobile phones in bunker cabins. And so it's been a real opportunity for us to be able to progress and allay some of these fears. And we have got men that have purchased them and they've got them in cell. But like I said earlier, and we believe that anybody that requires one should have one for the duration. There is no security barrier with them at all, and it's just a better opportunity for us to be able to communicate better and more effectively.
Well, you sort of alluded there to COVID really sort of lifting some of those barriers. I mean, I've got to still say thank you for the fact that you overcome those barriers before COVID. But I'm wondering if that could be then utilised to your thought process around your prison officers having used to that then. Yeah,
well, it's very similar. That obviously we have quite a number of staff now that come from Eastern European backgrounds and from other continents as well, actually. And also that we recruit staff whose literacy and numeracy levels are not entry level. So we have to do some additional work with them. And then we have an expectation that they're able to deliver quality work and key work and be able to produce procedurally just notices and communications. We have a number of staff that are dyslexic, where they're not able to display the full potential because sometimes it's a hidden disability that they're not willing to share. Yeah, it's ideal for our staff to allow them to be able to develop and have confidence that they're able to do that.
It definitely supports what I've found in my research with the prison officer training, Sean. So I'd like to say thank you and direct people to that piece of research I did with the interim report for the prison officer training. Exactly what Sean has identified. Sometimes there's a hidden difficulty with adults, and they've spent their lives working out ways to get around this. So to be able to just have that tool as an everyday kind of just there, available if you need it, is hugely important. And it was something we talked about, Janet, about how we implement the use of that pen with the tutors and then sort of disseminate that into the adult learners. So what kind of things have been really important to you in the studies when we brought it into the prison?
I think, first of all, there were lots of things, really. One of them was to try and think a bit laterally about how we use them. So we were quite keen to try them in maths because, as Sean said, we've got lots of learners who might come from a different country. They're quite literate in their first language. They're numerate, but couldn't access the maths curriculum because some of the questions are quite wordy and obviously in English. So it's great to be able to boost their English skills and simultaneously enable them to access the maths. Because before that, they were having to do all the English courses first before they could access maths. And then it's so empowering for them to get that maths certificate, and then they've got the confidence to go on and do the English. So that was a really important thing for us to see if it worked, to explore. And also the peer relationships, that if you've got one learner who's using the pen, another learner who might not feel confident normally to speak to people might ask about it, or the learner who's using it might not normally feel confident, but they suddenly are empowered. They're the important person who's got the resource. So even beyond peer mentoring, you're getting those links between prisoners and getting communication. That was really, really valuable as well.
And it was something I definitely recognised in your prison when I came along to do the studies, was that communication, that talking to each other, and also how for the Shannon Trust peer mentors, they felt it really enhanced that course. Would you like to just kind of share a little bit about what that chap had said to us?
I'm thinking back to pre-COVID days now when we had that conversation. But yeah, he was very, it gave him another way in with learners who might otherwise be reluctant to engage with them. They've been told they can't read, they've been told they can't write, they've been told they're stupid all their lives. They might even have been told people like us don't do reading and writing. And all of a sudden he'd got a new way to engage with them and to say, well, try this, we haven't tried this before. I haven't used it before, let's play together. And it really gave them an opportunity to try something new. And I can remember him discussing with us how much quicker some of the learners were progressing through the resources, the existing resources, and how the existing resources could be used with it. Because obviously they've got quite user-friendly font and that sort of thing. And it was just giving the learners much more confidence that, okay, the reason I can't do it is that I haven't tried the right way before, as opposed to, well, I'm just stupid.
And that's something that I came aware of, Sean, was the transition of prisoners. That prisoners sometimes don't get the opportunity to finish courses. So speeding up the delivery of a course must be important.
Yeah, and we're obviously rebuilding the curriculum, and we're looking at modular-based courses as well that allows them to either start or resume them in the custodial setting, and either conclude them on release or if they transfer to another establishment. But one of our concerns is that not all awarding bodies allow the use of them in the exam setting. City and guilds do approve them, but some others don't, so that's a barrier.
Yeah, and that was the news I was hoping Janet could share with us today, is that a lot of tutors would say, oh, but it can't be used in examinations. And as you just said, Janet, city and guilds?
Yeah, city and guilds until yesterday, blanket from JCQ and obviously including city and guilds, only the original orange exam pens were the ones that were allowed to be used in exams, which meant that if you went for the secure pen, which has also got the dictionary and becomes the learner's usual way of working for using a dictionary, which is great, but it wasn't allowed into the exam. So you had to then switch and use an orange pen, which hadn't got that function and so isn't as familiar with them. They then got to go back and try and use an ordinary dictionary. As of yesterday, I got confirmation from City and Guilds Policy Department that they are quite happy for us to use the secure reader, which has got the dictionary, with the dictionary activated in any exam where you would be allowed a dictionary. We do have to be very careful. You can lock the dictionary off with the new secure pen, which is great, because you can theoretically then use it in an exam, but they do want us to be very careful to prove that we can make sure that the prisoner hasn't got the opportunity to unlock it and make use of it. So what we've done is we've put together a document, which I'm more than happy to share if anybody needs it, that shows that yes, we don't have more than 10 in an exam room, so the invigilator can pay good attention. We'll set it up before the learners enter and take the lock off again after they leave. So we can do lots of things to make sure that things are maintaining the integrity of the exams. But that was hot off the press yesterday. So hopefully we can now roll that out with some of the other awarding bodies by showing them what we've done with City and Guilds.
Yeah. And if there are, for both of you, if there are examination bodies that are causing difficulties, perhaps what would work really positively is to provide that information back to scanning pens so they can work in conjunction with those awarding bodies to maybe understand what the blocks are, why there are worries and what we can do to overcome. Because I would like to say that it's statements from my prisons, including you guys at Moorland, that created and pushed for that secure pen. They heard what you were saying, they understood what the security concerns were, and they got back together and they created this amazing secure pen, which is basically coming from the comments you guys made. So if you can make such a huge impact on sharing things with somebody like myself, researchers, share it back to scanning pens as well, and let's see what other impacts can be made around examination bodies. So is there anything else you would like to kind of say about the scanning pen? I'm really kind of keen to hear what your personal thoughts are.
From my point of view, I think it is important to realise it's not a fix-all for every learner. There will be some learners who just are terrified of technology or don't like the way the voice operates and everything. But for the learners where it does work, it can be life-changing. So the key is to give everyone the opportunity to try it. And given my way, and I don't think Sean's going to disagree with me here, we'd have one in induction for anyone who wants to try. We'd have one on each wing so that if the guys get a letter, they haven't got to go and ask someone else to read it, which can be really embarrassing. And they've got that privacy. And if we can make it normalised that staff are using them, that prisoners are using them across the board, then somebody who's forgotten their glasses that day might use it. And it takes the stigma away, that stigma of having a learning difficulty. Yes, it won't be right for everyone. Don't be put off if the first learner you try it with, it's not for them. That's fine. Just in the way that some of us don't like certain types of music, not everything works for everyone. But when it does, it is so worth it.
Yeah, from our perspective, that it would form part of the day-to-day living for most of the men, because a lot of the things that we do come through a form of communication. A lot of the surveys that we expect the men to do, a lot of the engagements, all relates to some form of reading or understanding or changing direction or communication sharing. So it would very much form part of the day-to-day living. We totally understand that it won't be everybody's cup of tea, but it would make a difference for those that do consider it to be a benefit to them. And I would go wider than Janet. I do believe that if we identify on an LDD assessment, and if we know through the ESOL kind of assessments that the men would benefit from them, and they should be offered one.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Thank you so much. Julia, would you like to join us? Is there anything you'd like to ask?
Had a moment there where I couldn't find my controls. Here I am. I'd like to say thank you so much to Sean and Janet for your really insightful comments. You give us a window that we wouldn't otherwise have, and we really appreciate what you've told us. And it's wonderful to hear the impact, how positive the ReaderPen experience has been. And I imagine in this time, this crazy time we're in with COVID, more important than ever, if you cannot access the educational provision in the same way that you did before, that there is some kind of independent possibility to get on with your learning. And I think that's one of the key things that we were hoping would happen with the pens through lockdown. Have you seen evidence of that?
To some degree. I mean, it's difficult because it's a slow process. People have got to get used to using the pens. So for the people who've been using them before lockdown, that's been quite easy to continue and see their progress. Obviously, as we get better access to them now, as things begin to open up, it's easier to get them confident and using them in their cells. It has been a little bit slow sometimes getting them, you know, if they're behind a door and we can't access them, and on some sites we have been really quite locked down hard, that's more difficult. But I think now with more pens becoming available, we've now got that authorization to use them for exams, because you don't want to get people dependent on them and then they can't use them as you would like. That's going to make a massive difference as well. But the only other thing I'd like to say is it's a thank you to Sean, really, that Sean and his team have been so engaged with this. And, you know, I came in, you know, you're going to try my pens whether you like it or not. Everyone is really engaged and been so helpful. And I think that partnership working between education providers and other people within the prison as well as the prison themselves, that's what makes these things work. When you bring in a new innovation, you need that communication and that trust, and it's been fantastic. So thank you for that, Sean.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Communication, trust, good team, good researchers, an education department behind to provide for resourcing that you need, and great company like Scanning Pens who are listening and developing and supporting and have all the will behind this initiative and will help and support as much as we can. So I want to start to draw us to a close now and say thank you very much, but I would like the opportunity for for you to provide us some feedback. I've created a very short survey. If you would like to engage with that survey, if you've got any comments, requests, information, there are some open boxes where you can just write in there, and we can then get back to you and respond to you, because I realise that we've got guests from all over the world at this webinar today, and we want to communicate with all of you. So thank you so much, Janet and Sean and Chrissy, for bringing all of your really crucial, important knowledge into this forum to share. So I'll put the survey on. Christy, would you have a look at any questions that you might see in the chat while we do that, and just see if we can top and tail anything? If people want to start to leave, that's fine. But again, if you would like to complete the webinar, sorry, the survey, oops, wrong one. There we are. How is that? Please do. So I've just activated the survey. You are welcome to take part. Chrissy, can you see any questions that have come up that we just need to give answers to?
It's a lot to read through. Does anyone want to go to tap that?
How far? I'll help as well. Let me see if there's anything else that I haven't spotted. There's lots of people thanking you for the high quality information along the way.
Oh, that's great that you're going to take it back to American prisons. Thank you so much. Thank you.
There was a question, I think, for Sean about how many pens he had in his prison.
Right, we've got 11 that we own, and we've got 2 that the men have purchased.
How did they go about purchasing them, Sean?
Just made a request through education, felt it were going to be beneficial outside the learning classroom. It feeds right into the day-to-day communication, really. So they felt it was going to be beneficial 24 hours a day if required.
Really helpful to know, thank you. And
We've
if you
got a couple more secure pens arriving in the next few days as well, Sean.
That's good news.
Side.
And if you want to find out more about Chrissy's Pen on the Wing study, do remember to go to www.scanningpens.co.uk, have a look at markets, go to prisons, and then you can start to access all of that good information that we have available for you.
I see there's a lot of questions around reduction costs for prisoners. Oh, thank you, Helen. Lovely to see you. I don't think there's a general discount price, is there, Julia, for the prisoners?
I don't think so for the prisoners. I think if the prison was buying in bulk, the prison as a whole would be able to access some discount, and then perhaps that could be passed on to the prisoner. But that would be something to talk to Neil Ryland, who'll be happy to have those conversations with you.
Oh, so I suppose if a number of prisoners identified they'd like pens, and it was a number that enabled that reduction of price to happen, it could be done that way?
Yes, I think so. That would be a solution. And we answered the question about changing the dominant hand. There was a few questions about pen setups. So the wizard that I mentioned earlier, you can activate the wizard every time you pass on the pen to a new prisoner, so that they can set it up for themselves, but it doesn't store someone's or a multiple personalized settings, is what I would say. What else would I say? It's wipeable. Please don't submerge it in disinfectant or anything. Just give it a wipe clean. Okay. I'll just mention lanyards while I'm here. I'll show you. I've got an orange exam pen here on a lanyard. These are really helpful because it indicates if someone is wearing this around their neck that they know how to use this tool. And that means you would probably feel confident to say, oh, can you just show me how to? And you would know that person had the knowledge. So this is a sort of I don't know what to call it, a gasket, a shoe, a cover, but they're available from the Scanning Pens website. Very useful in schools, we found, and quite helpful for people who, like me, put their glasses down and then can't find their glasses. So
there's a question there from Victoria, which is quite interesting. I think, Sean, you kind of alluded to the prisoners that have bought their pens and using in cell. Are they in single cell, so they are possibly really looking after and taking care of their individual pens?
Well, we were quite fortunate. We purchased in-cell safes for all men for the medication, for the vapes, and for high-value items. So if they're not in use, they tend to lock them away, and they're quite hardy safes. So yeah, we've not had any issues with it either. And if somebody wanted one, then we'd give them an opportunity to either loan one from education or Braille, or we'd allow them to purchase one if that's what they wanted to do.
So I suppose there's no trade or
No.
evaluation to it to make it into a tradable device, really. And the cost, I think it was Victoria that asked that question, the cost of buying it in the first place would possibly stop a trade going on anyway, potentially. But I guess for me, and being naive and the researcher, I would like to think that the person that wants to buy the pen is doing so for their own outcomes, their own needs, their own wants, and their own future. And therefore, maybe that would stop it or alleviate it becoming a trade or a commodity. And if it's a number of them, Victoria, then they're going to be on shadow boards and they're going to be in the education departments protected and so on and so forth. So I just wanted to, I do realise that I probably am very naive, but I just wanted to kind of step out of that thought process of assuming this is what's going to happen and just start thinking of things slightly differently.
Well, it's like with most things new, other men would be curious, and without any shadow of a doubt would be saying, show me where it goes, let's have a look. So it could become, it could provide us with an opportunity to sell the pen itself in regards how useful it is and how beneficial it is to some men. And some men that previously wouldn't have wanted the additional support, having had an opportunity to play with it, may well purchase or request that support.
Yeah, it is that common ground, isn't it? It's seeing that. And that's why, and again, very naive, so you can all just go, tell me to go away under your breath, not out loud. I would love to see it as part of the prison officer uniform, you know, part of their equipment, the stuff they carry around, nice little reader pen locked in their pocket, obviously, or wherever, and it's just there, ready, available, or on the lanyard, or whatever. But yeah, it would just be great just to lift away that risk element of what it might be and what it should be.
That's a wonderful vision for us to, I think, wrap things up with, Chrissy. So thank you ever so much for joining us this afternoon. I'm going to bring the webinar to a close and say thank you very much to our special guests, Janet Christmas, and to Sean Mycroft, and to Chrissy, our researcher, Christine Franklin, who continues to want to go back to prison and finish her research.
Yes, in the right way. No.
So thank you to all of you who have come along this afternoon and who have written so many wonderful comments in the chat box. It's been a real pleasure finding out where you're from and what your interests are, and there have been some very moving comments that have been written along the way, so thank you all for contributing. I'm going to stick about for a little while longer in case there are any questions, but you are welcome to leave now. Thank you for taking part in the survey. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye-bye now.
Bye-bye. Thank you, everybody.